Find a pen and fill the paper with the message that it wants to send.
Okay, Adam Sikes, we are continuing our discussion of Niloufar Rahmani's story, Open Skies, My Life as Afghanistan's First Female Pilot, which you co-authored with her. And we just had Niloufar on for most of the discussion. And now this is the writing portion. Since it appears you were the magic behind this book and your writing skill. So can you mentioned at the beginning of our first part of this discussion that you were co-authoring a fiction thriller with some other folks, and I want to understand, what's your writing background? How did you get into writing and come to this book from that angle?
Sure. So I've spent the past 25 years in national security, either in uniform or as a paramilitary officer with CIA. So my professional career has spanned from the 90s until now, either in infantry or reconnaissance units in the Marine Corps, and then as an intelligence officer. I'd say probably 8 years ago is when I started taking writing seriously. I've always loved writing. I was one of those kids that was just a voracious reader. My undergraduate and graduate degrees were in history and international relations. I've loved reading and I've loved writing. And I was in East Africa in a safe house with another gentleman, and we'd been there for a while. And that's when I said, well, I have some time. I'm going to start outlining a novel and start writing it. So that's why I wrote my first chapter for a book that will never be published, for good reason. And so over a few years working with it, and as Niloufar was talking about, when you want to get in touch with somebody with a new field, you start networking. So I did some exploration in the writing world, and I ended up having the great opportunity to work with Richard Merrick, who's recently passed away, and he was Robert Ludlum's editor. He's the one who brought The Bourne Identity to print and about 10 other novels. So wow. I got to work with him on a novel, going back and forth, because I hadn't had any formal writing training besides for academics when it came to history and international relations. Well, from him and that book, I ended up meeting Judy, and I mentioned the other individual, Sam, who are my current agents right now, as well as Niloufar's. So we were working on a novel with them, and we were doing some developmental editing for that. And that's how Niloufar and I connected, was through that. But my interest for writing, had been a very long time, and where I've just been trying to really focus on it now because I'd like to do it more time. So there's a few things in the works, and it's just taken a lot of hard work and time.
Yeah, so tell me about that. How did you hone your craft? Because clearly, first of all, you're talking about writing fiction. That's a whole separate craft from writing a memoir. How did you prepare to write, generally speaking, and then how did you prepare to write this specifically?
So generally speaking, I think some of it boils down to an interest. You have to want to write. You gotta be willing to put the time in to squirrel away by yourself for long periods of time, and you have to be open to criticism to get better. Your first draft, you've got to realize, is gonna be most likely end up in the circular file folder, and you've got to keep going back around. So you got to be open to that. You've got to find some kind of satisfaction in that. And I like doing that. I got to write a lot, either in with my master's program or even with, the intelligence community. If you don't write it down, it never happened. So there's a lot of writing that goes in. So you take that, and I enjoyed it. But you're right. When you're writing fiction versus writing nonfiction, you're talking about two very different things. And when you're writing academic tomes versus writing something that is for, I'd say, popular consumption, it's very different. So I kind of had to figure out where I wanted to write. And initially I thought I would be writing about World War I and the colonial area, which is kind of my historic interests that go way back. I love that area. I've loved it all my life. Really enjoy reading about it. What I've ended up lately writing about is either current episodes or times in the 60s. So there's some stuff I'm working on now that deal with the Vietnam and the Kennedys, and Admiral Stockdale, if you know about him, the Navy pilot who was shot down in the Hanoi Hilton. So that's where I've kind of ended up with the nonfiction realm. And you take a different approach to writing nonfiction than you would fiction, but there are similarities. you still have to identify your audience. You still have to grab your reader. You have to keep your reader flipping the pages. You have to have a start, a middle, and an end. You have to have all these components that are so obvious, yet sometimes they are absent. I had one of my novels that I'm working on that the feedback I got from my beta readers was, yeah, I felt like you didn't end it. So I had to go back and put an ending in.
I guess so. Apparently, the other thing you need in fiction is an emotional arc for your characters. And I just realized that not only are you the first man that I've talked with, in this project, but you're also the first former military person an academic who has written in those worlds, and a little bit of intelligence too on my side, who has transitioned to writing fiction. So this is kind of fun. I tell people that this is the most terrifying experience of my life. This is a lot more terrifying than hovering a helicopter over the night, over the water in the middle of the night. So how are you doing with the emotional stuff, bringing your emotions to the page? How's that going for you?
So that, as you have suggested, can be a challenge. Particularly with some elements of my background, the emotions that from being a military pilot, that emotions generally are not valued. In
fact, we'd prefer not to know about them. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. That's not applicable to what we're doing right now, so keep it to yourself. No emotion ever won a battle, So writing, though, if you don't feel anything when you're reading it, it's going to be a dull read. Now, it can be informative. It can be illuminating and be educational. It can be all those things. But speaking for me, although I do enjoy picking up, those academic tones, sometimes it could be a book as well as a doorstop. There's other times where I want to read a book that grabs me, that pulls me in, that I feel like I am getting to know the people and I know the characters. And some of the best novels I've ever read and some of the best nonfiction books I've ever read, when I get to that last sentence, I feel like I'm saying goodbye to a friend. I felt like I got to know somebody, and they still surprise you. You never know what they're going to do next, but they have become real in some way. Yeah. So interestingly, when Nilüfer and I first connected, I helped write the book proposal. And so it was about her first solo flight. Yeah. So that was, trying to impart various components of what it felt like for her to fly. And fortunately, like I said, she is very expressive, very self-aware. I'm not a pilot, although I have flown on many different types of aircraft in all different situations. I'm not a pilot. I have no idea what it's like to control a machine like that. And I am always impressed when a pilot keeps us in the air and gets us on the ground safely. So she was able to express those emotions, but there were other parts of the book. I let Judy read it probably about 3 months into it for the first 3 or 4 chapters. And she came back and, I hope this is appropriate, but she said, Adam, this is crap. She says, Adam,
you got to be
you got to start writing with them. Yeah. She says, you got to start writing with a heck of a lot more emotion and dig down and start talking about all those things that you don't want to discuss. And I said, okay. And so for me, it was going back, listening to Nilüfer, listening to her story, putting myself in her shoes. And I have a 2-year-old daughter. And so I was thinking to myself, I'm like, what if my daughter had gone through some of this stuff? What would I be feeling for her? And so trying to put all that down on paper and looking at what I wrote and then saying not good enough and keep going again and keep going again, a little further. And as a writer yourself, that it's scary because you're about to expose yourself to the whole world.
Exactly. Thank you. Yeah. I say that to other writers and they're like, oh no, this is not scary. I'm like, yes, this is terrifying.
If it's going to resonate with people, it's got to ring true and you got to write about what you know. So, yeah.
Well, you can hopefully from my reaction in the first portion of this interview that you can see that you certainly had the effect of tapping into my emotional connection to her story. Absolutely. I was very moved by it. So you succeeded with her book. Yeah.
Thank you.
So we talked a little bit about the structure of the book. How were those decisions made? Did you kind of design the outline for this? Was it a team effort with the editor and Nilüfer? Like, how did you guys come to those decisions?
So this was very much a collaborative effort between Nilüfer and me. When we did the book proposal, the publisher basically, and the editor basically said, okay, we'll see you in a year. And so we had a year to put this together. So Nilüfer and I had a lot of conversations about, all right, you got to tell me your life from A to Z, from the time you were born until now. Tell me about your life. And so we would go through these long discussions, and I was essentially interviewing her at a topical level to say, okay, what kind of story do we have here? We knew where we were going to end. We knew that there was going to be asylum. We knew that she was going to survive. We knew her family was going to survive. We knew that there was going to be struggle. There was going to be tragedy. We knew all these things were going to happen, but how are we going to get there? So in all these discussions, her life had an arc of its own. And so we looked at that, and then we started outlining, and we would outline back and forth. Okay, we're going to start with your father because he has a tremendous story himself, and your mother, and they are instrumental to how you developed and became the person you were. And so we started with them, and then we had to add the historical components, either with the Soviet-Afghan War, the rise of the Taliban, 9/11, all these other pieces. We had to thread these through the whole manuscript. And so we outlined it out, and then we would talk about each chapter. We'd have to say, what's the point of chapter 1? What are we trying to communicate? Okay, Nilüfer, please write out your notes for chapter 1. Tell it like a story. Tell it how you want it to be, what you want to say. And then she would send me those notes via email. And then I would take that and I would draft the chapter using her notes, which oftentimes was following her narrative. Other times I'd look at it and we'd have to switch it around. And then we'd go back and forth multiple times to make sure the information was accurate. Did this actually happen? Did these things actually occur? Did you feel this way? And sometimes she said, yes, that's very good. Tweak here, tweak there. And other times she'd say, no, we need to change that. That's different. So it was very much a collaborative partnership as we developed the structure and then wrote it.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier about how you really, I thought, captured Nilüfer's voice, but then, I caught, there were some moments where I was like, oh, there's an Intel analyst in the room now giving me a briefing, especially the chapter on 9/11. I mean, that is your signature. Am I correct in assuming that?
That is, yeah.
Okay. Well, and it was perfect because it gave us, we're in this, zoomed in on Nilüfer and her experience, and you took us back out and gave us the full context and, sort of a brief history of events in the Middle East, just to give us, the full picture of what was going on. It was very well done.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much.
Appropriately timed.
Yeah. Well, we knew we wanted to hit an audience that in some cases wasn't even born when 9/11 happened. I mean, if you think about,
that's a good point.
We had just withdrawn, and I know there are servicemen and women who served in Afghanistan who weren't even born before 9/11. They have no memory of it, yet they were over serving in Afghanistan. So we had to add that historical context to not only show the rich history of Afghanistan, but the events that have taken place in the past couple decades that got us to this point.
Yep, and you did that. You did that very well. I want to know how are you promoting the book, and how's it doing? Because I think this book should be on the front table of every bookstore in the country right now, especially with current events. How's that going?
So we published through Chicago Review Press, and it was released on July 6th. And it had the typical roll-up where it went out to Publishers Weekly and the Library Journal and various places to get the reviews. We had some authors who were very gracious to give us the back cover blurbs, to give it some credentials and whatnot. And then it was promoted through a lot of the online systems. We did starting in July, we did kind of a radio tour, or Nilüfer did a radio tour. You're the first person that's ever wanted to talk to me. So, but she was doing quite a few interviews with radio stations around the country, talking about her life and promoting the book. And she did a couple TV interviews as well.
And Chicago Press put this together for her.
Yes.
Okay.
And then the withdrawal happened, and Afghanistan was once again front page news. So when that happened, Anderson Cooper, CNN, Fox News, everybody wanted to talk to Nilüfer because they'd known about her when she first sought asylum quite a few years ago. She was on a lot of interviews back then. So they started calling her, and I have to give her tremendous credit. I think she pushed through 30 interviews in just a few-week period. Not just national here in the United States, but international around the world. And it wasn't necessarily talking about her book. It was she is a successful Afghan pilot who grew up in Afghanistan, knew what it was like when the Taliban were in power in the 90s, and what it was like after NATO went in, after 9/11, and the American presence. And she was just there a few years ago, and now she's watching it on TV. So her perspective is just invaluable. And so that got us a lot of publicity as well. Still waiting for the first quarter sales figures. I think we're doing well. We're getting some good reviews and good reads in Amazon. And you probably know this as an author. I never knew this as an author, but those reviews that people do on Amazon or Goodreads or on Barnes & Noble are tremendous for a book, because it's not just telling a prospective reader that, hey, you should read this book. There's all types of the algorithms and technology that goes with it for how you get certain types of promotion and sales representation and marketing that fits into that whole system. So that was definitely a learning experience.
This is a mantra in the book club. Review your books. Review the books you read. It's like leaving a tip for the author. That's what I say. Yeah, precisely. Because absolutely. And I don't have anything published yet, so I haven't personally experienced, but I have been learning from all of the other authors and studying the industry. So yeah, it's really important. Review your books, people. That's great. It sounds, I'm getting sort of mixed signals from different authors that I talk to about the level of support that their publishers are giving them in terms of book promotion. So it's always encouraging to hear, when a book is getting its publisher involved in supporting these book promotions and stuff like that. But then, like you said, like Nilüfer already had some cachet with the media and with the current events, the timing of it, not, that anybody who wants to capitalize on that for any reason, but the timing of it is good for the book.
Yeah. It's also good for the story. I mean, it's horrific and tragic what has happened over there.
Yeah.
I'm still, like I said, I spent quite a few years in Afghanistan myself, in a very unique capacity. And I'm still trying to come to grips with what occurred and what is still.
All of my veteran friends. I worked for 6 years in joint environments. So I have many, many friends from many services, and everybody seems to be going through that. And I am feeling it vicariously through all of you. So, and to that point, I just feel like, do you feel like you were uniquely qualified to write this book with Nilüfer based on your experiences and where you are in your writing evolution?
I would never say I'm uniquely qualified at all. I do think some of my experiences and where I was in my writing made this a good partnership. I can name off quite a few other talented writers out there that I'm sure you would recognize that could have done, I would say, much better than I will ever be able to do, with similar backgrounds and interests and things like that. But I did draw upon a lot of my experiences. I did a lot of foreign military advising throughout my years, either in uniform or afterwards. And so being able to connect and work with people with different backgrounds, different perspectives, and being able to help understand them and help them understand you, and then, work together in a collaborative environment, that definitely served me well with Nilüfer, because it had to be a team effort. If we didn't get along, this never would have happened. And I never shy away from criticism, particularly with my writing, because I'm always, I think all writers have this innate fear that it's not good enough. So anytime I would get feedback, or like Judy's comment, you need to do better, you really take it to heart. And how do we get better? And is this working? So, being able to correspond and have beta readers take a gander and say, I like this, this didn't really work for me, or you really nailed it here. That was very helpful. I think there are times where just the stars aligned, and that's what happened with Nilüfer and me in this situation. And I'm so glad her book is out there, because, like I said, I have a little girl, and I hope maybe one day she'll read it, but I hope she has opportunities in that drive and recognition that we have it very, very good here in the United States, and that we should not squander that.
Are you comfortable talking about sort of the arrangement as a co-author with a contract like this, writing a book? Were you paid up front to write the book? Well, obviously your name is on it, so you're receiving royalties. Are you comfortable talking about that? Sure.
For Nilüfer and I, we just split it down 50-50.
Okay. Yeah.
It was very, very straightforward. I'm sure there were other folks in my developmental editing for other manuscripts that I've worked on. The arrangement has been different, but this was, we were clearly working from scratch, and we viewed it as, it's Nilüfer's story, but she also needs somebody to help write it. So we're going to collaboratively work together. So that's how it worked. Every situation is different. I have yet to have a similar arrangement, but I've not had the same situation either.
Right.
Some of the other nonfiction manuscripts I've been working on, they've either come to me with a draft manuscript, and then we've gone through and rewritten 25-30% of it. So the arrangement is different, where there's, other manuscripts I've worked on where I'm doing much less. It's more structural. And so the arrangement is different. So depending on how you want to set it up will really dictate it. And there's no rules. There's some industry standards, but, and you can find those online. There's all different ways to kind of look at things. But in order to be successful when it either comes to co-authoring a book or doing developmental editing, which is very close to doing a lot of rewriting, depending what you're doing, you have to have a good relationship with your partner. So that's great.
That in and of itself is great advice, but what other advice do you have for anyone as a writer who might be considering, and I am one of those people, considering co-authoring with somebody? What advice do you have for me? Particularly memoir like this.
Memoir.
Yeah.
As somebody who if it's your story or whoever that person who has that story, you've got to find what makes, and I mean this seriously, everybody's story is unique. Everybody's story is special. The wealth of our experiences out there is brilliant. To get somebody else to want to read your stuff, though, you got to find what is new or unique for your particular story. And how do you tell that? When you're working with that co-author, if that other person needs to, if they're telling your story, they should be asking you very personal questions, a lot of details that I know would make me uncomfortable. And you have to decide what you're going to say. What are you willing to share with the world, and what do you want to put in there? But what you're willing to share with the world, you also go so much deeper with that person who's writing it. Nilüfer and I talked about a lot of things that never made it in the book just because it wasn't right for the book, or because that's something maybe for her family's security we could not discuss. Or maybe she just wasn't prepared with herself to talk about something. We all have those components. So you have to have trust in that partner to have those discussions and think about it. It's not a snap decision either. You got to think about it. You got to explore it. You got to dig into it. And that goes for the person who's going to write it. If you're going to co-author a book with someone and write their story, or for those other writers out there who want to co-author with other people, you've got to get to know that person as a lifelong friend, and you've got to do it fast. You don't have a life to figure it out. You've got to do it quick, and you've got to do it deep, and you've got to be open and receptive to everything. You can't come in with preconceptions. It's so easy for us, particularly Americans, to perceive the world in a certain way. And we have to open ourselves up to how other people perceive it, and then try to put ourselves in their shoes and write about it. I think too, not everybody's going to like what you do. You can't please everybody,
No, exactly. Yeah. Well, you alluded to some other projects that you have going on. Is there anything that you're ready to share with us that we can look forward to? Sure.
So in September 2022, I have a novel coming out called Landslide. And it is an international thriller. There is a plane in there, but he's not a pilot. But it takes place.
That's okay. I do read other things.
You got to read everything. You got to read everything.
Exactly.
To write, you got to read everything. So I'm very excited for that. That's going to be coming out from Ocean View Publishing, which is out of Florida. Actually, it's an independent press out of Florida. And so that'll come out in September 2022. So very excited for that. And we'll be at Thriller Fest, which is the International Thrillers Writers Conference. That'll be in May, doing some promotion for that. There's another book, a memoir, that hopefully will be coming out in the next year and a half. It is Admiral Stockdale's son. And he is writing a memoir of what it was like growing up with his father, Admiral Stockdale, being the highest ranking and one of the longest serving POWs in the Hanoi Hilton. And, his father had a tremendous story, Medal of Honor, vice presidential run. I mean, very, very accomplished. But his mother, Sybil Stockdale, is just as courageous and just as influential as his father was. She was the leader of the League of Wives, which took on the Johnson administration head on to fight for them to recognize the treatment of the POWs in Vietnam. And she organized a national organization at a time when everybody dismissed the military wife and nobody wanted to hear it. And they made them come to grips with what was going on. So that's a memoir that's going to be coming out hopefully in about a year and a half. We're finishing it up now. Her son, Sid, who I'm working on it with, tremendous individual, turned into a great friend. So that'll be coming out. And then the other one is about the Kennedy's architect. And yeah, so a gentleman by the name of John Carl Warnecke, who at the time in the 50s and 60s and 70s had the largest architectural firm in the world. He met JFK before he became president. And then over time, they developed a friendship and it became a family friendship. And he was involved intimately during the administration and after JFK was assassinated, was the architect for Lafayette Square, the Eternal Flame, and a handful of other things, very connected with the family. And it's his story. There's a lot of the Kennedys involved because you can't tell his story without talking about the Kennedys, but his story of that time in the 50s and 60s is an architect. And when Jackie Kennedy basically brought American arts to the national level, when you think of the Kennedys, you think of the Bay of Pigs and the assassination, you think of all these other things. And if you live in Washington, D.C., you know about the Kennedy Center and people probably hear of it. But the Kennedys were they were to the arts what Theodore Roosevelt was to the national parks and conservation. They brought arts, architecture, literature, music, culture to a national level that hadn't been brought there before. So that's another just compelling story that's going to be coming out hopefully in a couple of years.
Yeah, all of these projects are fascinating. I'm so excited for you.
Thank you. I feel
you have good taste in stories.
I hope so.
Seriously.
I appreciate that. I feel very blessed. I feel very lucky to have had the career I've had, and now to be able to do stuff like this that makes me smile when I wake up in the morning. It's nice.
Well, good for you. Well, congratulations. I wish you all the best with all of your writing. I really appreciate this is sort of extra time for you to talk about writing, and it's like a personal tutoring session for me. But hopefully, we have one of the things that we're trying to do is to inspire and encourage the other women in aviation who have their stories, who might want to either write them themselves or look for help the way that you helped Niloufar do that, and show and give them the resources and tools to get them started. And so that's the contribution that you're making, and I appreciate that. And hopefully you'll read some of our other books. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I'm very honored to have been a part of this, not just the book, but this interview. And I look forward to reading your work and the others that come out of this. Please let me know. You have my contact information. I would absolutely love to read it.
Okay. You can read my young adult adventure novel.
I love
Very
that
different
stuff.
writing.